Good morning, everyone, and welcome to these 5 cloud services every developer should know. Let's try beat the coronavirus. It is a very, I would say, unfortunate circumstance that we had to, some of us had to cancel, mainly because of the travel that we've done in the past. And unfortunately, it's better for us to be safe than sorry. So instead of spreading the virus, although I don't think I have anything, but again, it's better to be safe than sorry. My name is Tibi Covaci. I'm originally from Romania, and I've been doing actually development for the past almost 30 years. Today, I'm working as a CTO for a company called Cloudian. We are based in Copenhagen, and we are actually helping our customers to move to the cloud. And some of the things that I'm talking about today are relating to what we are doing for our customers. So we've seen that there are a lot of people doing regular web applications, and they have an idea about they wanting to move to the cloud, and we are trying to help them both with the applications and with the infrastructure as well, and how they can do that. When I'm not working as a CTO, I'm doing other things, like I'm collaborating with a magazine called Code Magazine. It is the last one standing, I would say, at least in the .NET world, publishing information about .NET and actual articles. So it is still a physical, it's still a physical magazine. I'm a Microsoft Regional Director. This is not an employment. This is an award that I got from Microsoft for my technical contributions within the world of Microsoft technologies, and I'm as well a most valuable professional. And that's an award given for the community work, meaning that I do a lot of free work, on Microsoft behalf, talking at conferences and convincing people about how good Microsoft technology is. So that's why I got this those awards. Having any of those 2 awards means that I get invited to Microsoft Campus once a year. I was supposed to be there in 2 weeks' time, but again, because of the coronavirus, Microsoft decided to move that into an online conference. If you want, you can follow me on Twitter as well as Tibor19, and you have my email address in case you want to get in touch with me after this session. So let's get started. We have 40 minutes to talk about about the services that every Azure developer should know. And maybe before I start talking about that, let's talk a little bit about the current state and why actually it is important. So one of the things that we want to do as developers is to we might be asked to move to the cloud, or we might be fed up with the fact that we always have to fight with our IT department to get machines up and running and to update the things to the latest. We might want to use some piece of technology that is not available, that is available out there, new releases or everything, but most of the times we get pushbacks from the IT department because they haven't had enough time to test it, haven't had enough time to run through it. So sometimes we might find ourselves in a situation where we start creating our own things. So that's why we have a situation where we have an application, for instance, running already on-prem, but then we want to move everything into the cloud. So there are 5 services, and those 5 services that I think, as a developer, you should be aware of are web applications. So how can you deploy a web application into a cloud provider? Now, I might have hinted, that already, but I am being a Microsoft, I wouldn't call it a fanboy, but being, working so much with Microsoft technologies, I would show you all the things that I'm doing by using Azure. So again, that doesn't mean that this or what I'm saying applies only to Azure. It applies to any cloud provider out there, and those are pieces of technologies that you should be able to understand in order to be able to be successful with your with your applications. Now, the other part is databases. So how can we use a database in the cloud, and why would we actually want to use a database in the cloud in the first place? And then we are going to talk about storage. So how can we store the data, some binary data inside our cloud? And then we're talking about some serverless functionality. So one of the things that, quite often you have to do, you have small pieces of functionality that needs to be run either when something happens, so as a reaction to a certain event, or where you want to run those when at a certain interval of times. So how can you achieve that without having to deploy any infrastructure, or actually without worrying about how the infrastructure is deployed? So serverless as a name might be a misnomer because it's not really that we are not having a server. It's, I would say, it's I couldn't care less about the server type of functionality. So that's what I would call it. And then last but not least, how can we deal with secrets? So not only how can I secure my application, but how can I make sure, for instance, that even if I have someone that has to administer or operate my application, they shouldn't get access to to the full data. They should only be able to manage the application itself without going and see the data inside it. So how can we separate those, and how can we make sure that whatever the user is doing in the right way? So, as I mentioned, the current state or the architecture. So what do we have today? We have a simple application. I have a web application that is running on a on a web server, and behind it I have the database. So that's on-prem. That's two different servers, and I need to make sure that they're running. And then of course I have to have all those firewalls and all the things in place that I need to run. And my application is a very simple application. I have actually a recipe site. So in my recipe site, I have a recipe for different type of food, and then I have the possibility to actually either get a weekly menu or to get one single recipe and get the details and see exactly how can I cook that one and what exactly would it do for me. So without further ado, let me show you a little bit how the application looks like. So we have the application like this. So I have the application deployed on my local machine, and instead of having a database server, I'm just using a local database file. But the application is called, the spaghetti code recipe file, and it has, several pages. For the purpose of this demo and for the purpose of this presentation, I'm actually using only two links in here. I have one called the weekly menu. So weekly menu would actually go to the database and will try to retrieve 7 recipes. In my database, I have only 3 recipes, so it doesn't really it doesn't really matter. I just added tray in order for me to show you how the things are done. And then I have a way for me to show a certain recipe. So I can either go from the weekly menu and go into the detail, or when I press I feel lucky, it will take me to one certain recipe that I can look actually at the detail of that recipe and how can I do it. So the application itself, it's very simple. Now, when we look at how the application is implemented, I have done the application using .NET Core. So it's a .NET Core 3.1 application, and and it has 2 parts. One part, it's an API part. So inside my API, I have a simple controller that gets my recipes from the database and then sends them to the to the front end. And then I have a front end that is a Angular. Right, this one actually it's an Angular 8, but would be pretty easy to update to Angular 9 as well. But this is an Angular 8 application, and that application is actually again it's pretty simple. I have the application with different modules. I have a recipe module, I have a navigation module, and I have a homepage module, and so on. And I'm using routing, and I'm using more or less all the things that you could see inside a regular Angular application. The reason I'm doing that, and again, I don't think it matters the type of technology you use at the end of the day, it's just the concept itself. But the reason I chose that is because most applications today have this separation. They have a front end, which is which is some kind of single page application, so a SPA, and then we have a backend, which is some kind of web API. So it could be, it could be Java, it could be ASP.NET Core, as it is in my case. So regardless what you're using, you have this kind of separation. So having this separation, it means that we need to look at how we can deal with this application. So I'm running this application right now. So what I need to do actually is to stop the application. By stopping the application, then I can start, I can start working a little bit on it. So the first thing I mentioned was something called the web application. So let me show you inside Azure. Actually, we have Azure in here. I can start by saying I want to create a new resource. So when I create a new resource in Azure, and if you want to get to know Azure more, actually, I recommend you go to azure.com, and there you have the possibility to create a free account. I'm not advocating for going there. If you want to go and do stuff in AWS, I would say conceptually what I'm doing here is exactly the same thing. So again, ignore the fact that it's Azure. I'm just using that because I'm more familiar with this. So the very first thing you do, you need to start creating a web application. I can do that in so many ways. So this is actually one of the, I would say, the simpler way. But at the same time, I would say this one is the kind of things that you should do only if you have a one-off, a one-off creation. In most situations, especially when you want to deploy your application, what you would end up doing, you would actually end up doing by to deploy your application by using either some code or some CI/CD pipeline. Again, Azure offers this kind of functionalities, but those are outside the scope of this presentation. So the very first thing we need to do is to create a resource group. And the resource group is nothing more than just, I would say, a logical folder where I want to put all my applications. So I would call something 0304. This is a resource group. And then when I'm creating that resource group, I can, I will know that all the files and all the resources that I need to create for this kind of application would be in the same place. Then the second thing I need to create, it's my web application. And that again, it specifies where do I want to store it, what kind of functionality do I want for it. Do I want a .NET Core? Do I want Windows? Do I want Linux? I can choose a Windows deployment, although I know my application is .NET Core. It shouldn't be any problem. You could deploy that application there directly. Then I can specify that I want to have a application plan for it. I can specify, again, location. Usually I choose something that is closer to where we live, either North Europe or West Europe. West Europe is the one that knows. I know that it works quickest for us. I can change as well what I want to create, the name of the application plan. So it would be something like AP, a recipe. I just want to have names that I have control over. Okay, and once I'm done with those and I say this is what I want to run for my application, then I can say, if I need monitoring, for the sake of this presentation, we don't need any monitoring. If I want to tag it in any way, in order to be able to easily, for instance, work with it and get an idea where I spend my money, I can choose tagging for that. And once I have all the information, I can say, please create this web application. Now, for the application to get created, it will take a little bit of time. So I will press create here. And, like any good chef, I will show you how it would look when it's already created. So let me go in here. I will go to the resource groups that I have created already. So I have one that I created 2 days ago, and I already have here the things that I need for my application. So one of the things that I have in here, it's the web application itself. Now, we need to do something. So once we get the application, we can go back into Visual Studio Code. And then Visual Studio Code, actually, it's pretty, it's pretty neat from that point of view, because it has a lot of built-in support for doing a lot of things. Like I can do a deployment of an application. Of course, if I want to do deployment and I want to use those kind of tools, it will take a little bit of time. So again, having only 40 minutes for this presentation, that wouldn't give us too much time. But what I'm getting in here, I get information about existing applications. So this one, it's something that I have already deployed a little bit earlier. This one is the one that I'm creating, that I have just created right now. I need to make sure that it's ready. It is created before I move on, and it says that this was created. So then before I move on, I need to make sure that it's created, and then I can say in here, deploy to web app. So by saying deploy to web app, it would ask me, okay, what exactly do you want to deploy? So I want to deploy my recipe application folder. And that will start actually when it will start building the application. And once it's built, all the application and everything that it has to do with the application, it will start uploading it into Azure, and then it will start testing it and make sure that everything is okay. And then it will take me to that particular page. However, this one will take us quite some time, so I really don't want to do that. So I will just show you, I will just show you how it looks when everything gets already deployed. Now, if I don't like that way of deployment, I can do a different deployment. I can say something like .NET publish. And when you say .NET publish, again, it's exactly the same thing. You want to publish your application. I would say I want to do the release publish, and I want to put everything into a folder called publish folder in my current folder. So by doing this, it will build the whole application. And again, one of the biggest challenges and what it takes the longest time in here is the fact that I have a Angular application. And because it's an Angular application, it needs to run ng-build. And when it runs ng-build, it will do, it will do all the it will use Webpack to package everything and do chunking of my my JavaScript files and so on and so on. So I will let that work, and I will show you exactly what it looks like when it's done, and how can I deploy by using this publish file as well. So I will show you another different way of publishing this. Now, another thing that we need to do, and what I mentioned, was the databases. So one of the databases, so as you can see here, ng-build dashboard, it's starting. So when we are talking about the databases, the reason we want to use a database inside Azure or inside a cloud provider is because we want to concentrate on building our application. I don't want to deal with backup of the database. I don't want to deal with maybe, if I need a bigger database or a smaller database, I don't want to deal with all those kind of things. So one thing that I want to make sure is that I have a place where I can store my data, where I can dump my data, and someone can take care of managing that type of data. So inside my resource group, I can go on and say, I want to create a new database. So I will go in here. I would say I want to add a database. And when you specify a database, it would ask you simple things like, what name do you want to have for your database? So it would be DB, let me take the correct resource group, DB recipe 0304. Okay, and then I select the server. I don't want to get an existing server. I want to create my own server. So it would be SRV recipe 0304. So that's a server that I'm creating specifically for this demo. Where do I want to place that server? You can place it anywhere in the world. However, my recommendation is to try to place it as close to your application as possible, because you don't want to spend a lot of time reading the data. I would create a username called admin 2020. And I would give it a password as well. So this is actually an administrative user, and this this username and password actually would be used. Let me see. Let me try again. I need to know how to do twice the same thing. Okay, apparently I know. So I'm creating the username and the password for the server. And again, this is a logical server that I can use to create my database. And then I can configure the database. Now, when I configure the database, I configure that based on what type of needs I have and how much money am I ready to spend. So it says here, if you take a generation 5 type of database, you would end up paying about 214 euros per month. This one actually contains both the storage and the processing power and the licensing for SQL Server. So you don't have to have a license to run that. However, if you look at the smaller way of working, like I want a standard database, I know that I won't have more than 250 gigabytes of data. Actually, I won't have more than 100 megabytes of data, but there is no difference in price in here. So I would rather, use the maximum amount of data, making sure that I have enough place to grow. And if I need more, DTU stands for data transfer unit, and it's a way for you to specify about how much data, how much concurrent transactions, and how much combination about memory and processing and storage do you want to use. There is a whole algorithm that Microsoft is using. Again, I don't really worry about that right now because the DTU, the 10 DTU, it's more than enough for my application as it is right now. Of course, if I would need more, I will just have to go back and then move that like this, and then I will get a much bigger type of database, so that everything would be based on my needs. Again, I don't really need that much. I will say apply, and that would take the things that I need. I would use a public endpoint, meaning that the database would be available for everyone. I want to make sure that all Azure services, so that includes my web application, would have the access to this one. And I want to use my current IP address, so it will know where I'm creating this one from, because I want to be able to manage the database when I work with it. Now, the database might have some data. I don't have a backup created yet. So normally what you would do, you would have either a backup so you can already create the database, or you can use tools inside .NET framework that would allow you to deploy the database, deploy a content into the database. So the next thing that I want to do is to actually go in here and say, I don't have any database to use. Again, I can use tagging in order to make sure that I send that to the right business unit, so I know exactly who spent the money inside my organization. And once I have everything, then I'll press create. So let's allow this one to get started. And once this is started, then I can go in and show you how a ready database looks like. So now it's deployment in progress. I can go back to resource groups, and I'm looking at this one. So I got now I have a SQL server in here, and I have a database. So those is how the database and the server will look like. Now, when I'm looking at them, I can as well get the connection strings. So having the connection strings in here, it says, if you want to connect to this database, this is the connection string that we are recommending you to use. So I can copy this one from here, and I can go into my application and say, you know what, this is my web application. And I can say, I want you to update the configuration of my application, and I want you to use this new database to read the data. And my connection string was called recipe context. So let me show you how it looks inside my application. I have an application settings.json. So for the development reasons, I'm using actually a local database, and the local database, it's called the recipe.db, which is nothing more than just this file that I have in here. So that's how I get the database in a local environment. However, in Azure, I cannot use that. So that's why I have to deploy the database separately. So without deploying the database, I wouldn't be able to show you any functionality. I will show you an application, but it's just, it's just the HTML without any data. So I can edit the connection string. And right now, as you can see, I have the recipe 0302. I can replace that with recipe 0304, which it would be today's date. And once I do that, I can say save. Now, going back to my application, after application is deployed, I will get a link for it. So the link would be recipe 0302 azurewebsites.net. So when I'm going in here, I can actually see now the application, and as you can see, this application, it's deployed on Azure. So I can go in here and I can say, I can use this weekly menu. So then this will read the data from the database and it will show me the results. Or I can say, I feel lucky, and it will show me the first recipe that I have in the database. So it works pretty neat, and it does a lot of things for me right out of the box. Now, we have other things that we need to fix. So one thing I promise you that I will show you how the publishing looks like. So I have the publishing in here. So this is the files that I need. And what I need to do, I need to send all of them to a zip folder. So once I'm creating the zip file, I can take that zip file and do something inside Azure called, so let me do this, publish zip. I can do something called something called the zip deploy. So let me go in here and show you how this one would look like. So going back to my resource groups, I can take recipe 0304, and I can look at the application itself. And when I look at the application, I have actually I have an advanced tools for that. So if I go to the advanced tools page, it will show me a backend, more or less, of my application. So I get access via the web interface. I get access to my website, so I can see all the things that are already deployed. I can see the stuff that are working in there. So I can take a site extension, and it will show me. Let me. Tools, sorry, and I can look at one called zip deploy. So now zip deploy shows me that I have one single page in here. So what I can do, I can take the zip file from here, do a drag and drop, and when I drop it here, it will start uploading the file. And once the file is uploaded, it would be unzipped inside this particular folder. So everything that I had in here actually ends up being deployed in here. This is actually much quicker than doing the deployment straight within the Visual Studio Code, mainly because Visual Studio Code, again, it will try and do everything manually. It will upload file by file and so on. Or at least like this, I'm getting to deploy all the stuff that are already in there. So once this is done, I think I can go back now to my recipe 304, and I can show you that I got the file here up and running. So let's see. You know, this would be a simple ASP.NET web application, and it will just show me a simple page. However, remember, I haven't configured anything about the connection string, so I have no database behind it. So what that means, it means that if I try to run this application, I don't get everything functional. So let me see why. Copy image link. What is? Oh, yeah, I know what's happening here. Okay, so this one is actually using the local database, but if I want to make it now working, I need to with my actual database, I need to go in here and update the connection string inside my application and make that connection string work with the database. So let me go in here and actually just for the for the fun of it, let me copy the connection string from here, from this application, recipe 0302. I can go in here. I can take this connection string, I can copy it, and then I can go to my other application and I can say, I can use the same connection string. And the reason I'm doing that and I'm not using the new database that I'm creating is because I don't have a database populated. So I don't want to populate the database right now. So I would say new application settings, no, new connection string. The name would be recipe context. The type would be a SQL Azure, and the value would be the one that I copied from the other page. When I save changes, that would mean it has to restart my application. If I do a refresh now, it will work. But again, with a with the wrong link for the pages, because this one is actually that I took it one step ahead. So I need to go back and I will show you exactly what I've done and why it looks like this. So next step that I mentioned, or next technology that I mentioned that we need, it is a storage account. So now a storage account is a specific, this is specifically done to actually sustain big loads of data. So you can upload and download data, and it has a very high performance. And one thing that you can do actually with a storage account when you work with it is to be able to use a CDN. So you can put a CDN in front of a storage account, and that data would be distributed across the world. So when you work with a storage account, what you need to do is to actually first create it. So when you create a storage account, you need to specify a name. The name needs to be uniquely worldwide. You need to specify as well a location. So let me go in here and choose West Europe. The name of the storage account, it's something with small letters and numbers that, again, it should be unique worldwide, and it has to have up to 24 characters in length. Now, when I create a storage account, I need to specify how do I want the data to be, how do I want the redundancy of my data. So the cheapest version it's to have local redundant storage, and local redundant storage means that I will have actually 3 copies of my data stored in 3 different, in 3 different clusters. So in case that one of them is going down, then I will have my data would be recreated without any issues. Now, 3 copies gives you actually better protection than you get from the from a mirroring. Now, the second one, it's actually how do I want to get access to it? For the sake of simplicity, I would use a public endpoint, meaning that everyone that has a link to this would be able to get access to the to this the storage account. Then I have a secure transfer, and that means that I want to use only HTTPS. The next thing I have is let me go back in here. The next thing I have, again, it's tagging. I want to make sure that I'm putting, this is just simple metadata, but I want to make sure that I have some information about it so I can later on go on and maybe do filtering or looking for other type of information. And once I have every information, every piece of information, I can say create. Once I'm done with creating this storage account, then I have then I have the possibility to start uploading the data. So let me go back to my previous, previous storage account. Where is it? Resource groups, RGR302, and I have a storage account in here. Now, with the storage account, I can actually go in here and have something called containers. So containers are nothing more than just folders that I have access to it. So this one, by default, whenever you create a container, so let me create one called small images. And I would say, okay, whenever you create a container, you need to specify the type of access you want to give to people. So by default, the access level, it's private. It means that no anonymous access is allowed. But I can say, you know what, if you have the link, the full link to the file, I would like for you to get access to it. So once I change this one, you remember that I had an error here earlier on the page that said actually that this is not, this is not accessible. Now, if I try again, then as you can see, I have this one available. So if I go back to my application and I do a refresh in here, it will show me that the file, it is available after some time, yes. So it takes some time, but if I do now a refresh, it's much quicker. Again, the reason I want to use this kind of technology and I want to put the data into a storage account and not storing the data inside my, let me close this, this one, and the zip deploy. So the reason I want to do something like this and I want to use a storage account is mainly because I want to make sure that people will get, again, the data will get, will get stored in a location that makes retrieval much quicker. But not only that, if you look at how the recommendations are for you to improve the performance of your of your website, at least to decrease the loading time of your website, the best way to do it is to go in and say, I want to get static content like files, like images from a different site. So by putting those images in a storage account, it means that we have a much quicker time or much quicker time to load our pages, because we are going to have separate downloads from separate addresses at the same time. So now that this is working, and we saw how the storage accounts are working, let me go in this one and change as well the access level to Blob, and you would see in a minute why this is important, or why do I use this one. So the next step that I have here is actually to create a Azure function. Now, Azure functions are, what I mentioned earlier as being serverless. In AWS world, those are called the Lambda functions, but they are representing exactly the same thing. So when you create an Azure function, what you say is actually, you know what, dear Azure, I would like for you to give me the possibility to create a, to deploy some code that I want you to run for me when something happens. So I don't care about, I don't care about the type of infrastructure you want to associate with that. I don't care about any of the things that you want to do. But the only thing I do care about is actually for you to run my code when that happens. And of course, instead of me paying for having an infrastructure up and running all the time, I want for you to, I will pay for you every time when I need to work with, every time when you need to do something about it. So let me show you quickly how I create a function. So I can create a function either from Visual Studio or from Visual Studio Go code, or from any editor at the end of the day, or I can use an in-portal functionality. Now it shows me here that I have some predefined templates. So if I use webhook plus API, that means that it would actually it would be an endpoint for me, an HTTP or HTTPS endpoint that I can invoke, and this will actually invoke my function. I can use a timer. That means it will run this function at a certain interval, or I can look at more templates. And those more templates actually, it will allow me to do something here. So I would say, I want you to actually the Azure Blobstore to use an Azure Blob Storage trigger. The name would be a resize image, for instance. And the trigger, would look at actually where do I get the data? So I'll get the images. And the storage account connection would be into the Azure Web Job Storage connection string. Azure Web Job Storage connection string was actually created when I created the function, and I made it point at my storage account. So that's something that I already have created. So when we look at this one, it will start creating my function, and it will tell me, okay, this is how your function looks like. Now I have some files in here. One of the files I have, it's a function JSON, and the function JSON file is actually a way for me to specify what exactly do I want to use as as parameters and so on. So let me call this in blob, and then I want to add a second parameter to my Azure function, and that second parameter will be an out blob, which I would use actually to store the data. If you might actually, if you think about it, and this might be actually a good indication, looking at the name of the function, what I want to create right now, it's a simple function that does a resizing of an image. So I'm putting an image in here in the images container, and that would automatically be made smaller and sent into a small images container. One more thing that I need to do, so let me save this file. One more thing that I need to do, I need to actually, before I write any of my code, I need to make sure that I have, I have the right packages, functions, function.proj. I have the right function working here. So what I need to do, I need to actually add some reference to it. I would say I need the 6-label image sharp. So there is a nugget package that actually allows me to resize the images that I'm having. And last but not least is the function itself. So the function itself is pretty straightforward. Let me go and show it to you like this. So what I need to do, I say, you know what? I get the in blob information, and I want the data to be sent to the out blob. I have a name of the file in here. And of course, if I need to log some information, I can use the logger information. And what it says in here, it says, I want you to load the in image, and I want to resize it to a size of 130 times 20. And I want to use the maximum mode, so you are encoding and you are making the file as small as possible. And once you resize the image, I want you to save it as my out blob. So meaning that this would be sent to my out blob information. Okay, so saving this one as well. Next thing I would have to do is to test this. And the way I'm testing this is actually just going inside my storage account, uploading a file, and then that file would automatically be moved to my, smaller page. The reason I'm doing this is actually I want to improve the performance of my application, and I want to replace those, with a thumbnail. So instead of using the big image file that I'm uploading for the recipe, I just want to use a thumbnail that's 130 by 200. Now, in the interest of time, I won't be able to show you that. However, the whole code it is available on GitHub. So I will give you the GitHub repo name in just 1 second. But one last thing that I want to mention, because we have 1 minute, or actually we have no more minutes left, it's something called a key vault. So a key vault, it's a way for me to store secrets. So, and I will show you exactly the use case for it. So I have 2 places. One of them is this one. If you look in here, I have a connection string. And the problem with this connection string is that as an administrator of the application, I get to edit it. So in other words, you can see the password in here. You won't be able to do too much with it because I will remove all the database right after this presentation. So in about 2 minutes. But anyway, the idea behind it is that, you know, I don't want you to see that. So instead of using this connection string, what I would use a pointer to my key vault. And the way you create a key vault, like any other resources in Azure, is to go in here, say, create a resource, and then you say key vault, and then I can choose the key vault itself. Now, the key vault, not only that stores your secrets, but it's doing an auditing as well, meaning that if anyone gets access to it, you will see who got access and why, what did they look at, and so on and so on. So it is actually a pretty good way for you to be able to store secrets and make sure that your application was well, was well kept secret, I would say. So that being said, we are at the end of my my presentation. So questions? And if not, I will give you as well the link to the I'll give you the link to the GitHub repository for the application itself.
Thanks, Tibi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. Okay, so we are slightly over time. I do have one question I'd like to ask. How's the update story? Say you have version 1 running of the application for some time, and then you want to deploy version 2. Like, does Azure support like a rolling deployment where you?
Yes. So the best way to do it, actually, I would recommend it's using something called a storage a deployment slot. So with a deployment slot, I can actually have a parallel copy of my application. So as you can see here, I have something called production, and I can add a slot called staging. Why not? You know, a staging slot. I can copy the settings from my existing application and I can say add. So what that will do, it will actually have an empty application for me, but has exactly the same configuration and exactly the same thing as my original application. It will run on exactly the same machines. Now, what that does for me is once this slot is done, I can actually deploy into this staging slot. And then I can look into the functionality and say, okay, so that looks actually pretty good. I'm happy with the way the staging slot looks like. So I would say close. So I can look at this one. I'm happy with the way the things are looking like. Of course, now it's an empty application because I only copied the settings, not the application itself. But now I have, again, then I have a different application, or I would say a different version of my application. Once I'm happy with that, the one thing I need to do, I go back to the deployment slots and I would say swap. So the swap would happen actually with almost zero downtime. So once the swap is done in here, it might take here. So it might take for me here about 30 seconds, but in the, when this is done in here, the applications would be updated as well. So once this is done in here, I can just go in here and do a refresh of my page. Actually, let me copy because it's a recipe 0302 in here. So recipe 0302 would look like this, while this one would look like my recipe application.
Thanks for showing that.
Okay.
I think that's all the questions we're going to take now. But once again, thank you for your presentation. I think it was very interesting to watch along.
Okay. Thank you very much.